So, as you said, your darkest moment in 2017, when all of this went down, one of the things that happened is you were no longer on the House of Cards for the last season. Let's go to the beginning of that show.
Okay.
One of the greatest TV series of all time. A dark, fascinating character in Frank Underwood, a ruthless, cunning, borderline evil politician. What are some interesting aspects to the process you went through for becoming Frank Underwood? Maybe Richard III, there's a lot of elements there in your performance that maybe inspired that character.
Well,
Is that fair or no?
I'll give you one very interesting specific education that I got in doing Richard III and closing that show at BAM in March of 2012, and 2 months later started shooting House of Cards. There is something called direct address. In Shakespeare, you have Hamlet talks to the world. But when Shakespeare wrote Richard III, it was the first time he created something called direct address, which is the character looks directly at each person close by. It is a different kind of sharing than when a character is doing a monologue, a opening of Henry IV. And while there are some people who believe that direct address was invented in Ferris Bueller, it wasn't. It was Shakespeare who invented it. So I had just had this experience every night in theaters all over the world, seeing how people reacted to becoming a co-conspirator, because that's what it's about. And what I tried to do, and what Fincher really helped me with in those beginning days, was how to look in that camera and imagine I was talking to my best friend.
Because you're sharing the secret of the darkness of how this game is played with that best friend.
Yeah, and there were many times when I suppose the writers thought I was crazy, where I would see a script and I would see like this moment where this direct address would happen. I'd say all this stuff and I'd go, when we do a read through of the script, I go, I don't think I need to say any of that. And they were like, what do you mean? I said, well, the audience knows all of that. All I have to do is look. They know exactly what's going on. I don't need to say a thing. So I was often cutting dialogue because it just wasn't needed. Because that relationship between that I'd learned, that I'd experienced doing Richard III was so extraordinary, where I literally watched people, they were like, oh, I'm in on the thing, and this is it's so awesome. And then suddenly, wait, he killed the kids. He killed those kids in the tower. Oh, maybe it's not so. And you literally would watch them start to reverse their having had such a great time with Richard III in the first, 3 acts. And I thought, this is going to happen in this show. If this intimacy can actually land, and I think there was some brilliant writing, and we always attempted to do it in one take. No matter how long something was, we would try to do it in one take, the direct addresses. So there was never a cut. When we went out on locations, we started to then find ways to cut it and make it slightly broader. But
that's interesting because you're doing a bunch of, with both Richard III and Frank Underwood, a bunch of dark, borderline evil things. And then I guess the idea is you're going to be losing the audience and then you win them back over with the addresses.
That's the remarkable thing, is against their instincts and their better sense of what they should and should not do, they still rallied around Frank Underwood.
And I saw even with the documentary, the glimmers of that with Richard III. I mean, you were seducing the audience. Like there was such a chemistry between you and the audience on stage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
What is that?
in that production, that's absolutely true. Also, Richard is one of the weirder, I mean by weird, it was an early play of Shakespeare's. And he's basically never off stage. I mean, I remember when we did the first run through, I had no idea what the next scene was every time I came off stage. I had no idea what was next. They literally had to drag me from one place to another. Say, now it's the scene with Hastings. Now it's this. But I now understand these wonderful stories that you can read in old books about Shakespeare's time, that actors grabbed Shakespeare around the cuff and punched him and threw him up against the wall and said, you ever write a part like this again, I'm going to kill you. And that's why in later plays, he started to have a pageant happened and then a wedding happened. And the main character was off stage resting because the actor had said, you can't do this to us. There's no breaks. And it's true. There's very few breaks in Richard III. You're on stage most of the time.
The comedic aspect of Richard III and Frank Underwood, is that a component that helps bring out the full complexity of the darkness that is Frank Underwood?
I certainly can't take credit for Shakespeare having written something that is funny, or Bo Willimon and his team to have written something that is funny, is fundamentally funny. It just depends on how I interpret it. There are, that's one of the great things why we love. In a year's time, we can see 5 different Hamlets. We can see 4 Richard IIIs. We can see 2 Richard IIs. That's part of the thrill, that we don't own these parts. We borrow them and we interpret them. And what Ian McKellen might do with a role could be completely different from what I might do because of the way we perceive it. And also, very often, in terms of going for humor, it's very often a director will say, why don't you say that with a bit of irony? Why don't you try that with a bit of blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, there's often that like a wry smile. The line that jumps to me when you're talking about Claire in the early, maybe first episode even, I love that woman more than sharks love blood. I guess there's a lot of ways to read that line, but the way you read it had both humor, had legitimate affection, had all the ambition and narcissism, all of that mixed up together.
I also think that one should just acknowledge that where he was from, there is something that happens when you do an accent. And in fact, sometimes when I would say to Bo or one of the other writers, this is really good and I love the idea, but it rhythmically doesn't help. I need at least 2 more words to rhythmically make this work in his accent, because it just doesn't scan. And that's not iambic pentameter. I'm not talking about that. There is that as well in Shakespeare, but there was sometimes when it's too many lines, it's not enough lines in order for me to make this work for the way he speaks, the way he sounds, and what that accent does to emphasis.
How much of that character, in terms of the musicality of the way he speaks, is Bill Clinton?
Not really at all. I mean, Clinton, look, Bill Clinton, he had a way of talking, that he was very slow and he felt your pain, But Frank Underwood was a deeper, more direct, and less poetic in the way that Clinton would talk. I'll tell you this Clinton story that you'll like. So we decided to do a performance of The Iceman Cometh for the Democratic Party on Broadway. And the president is going to come. He's going to see this 4.5-hour play. And then we're going to do this event afterward. And a couple weeks before we're going to do this event, someone at the White House calls and says, Listen, it's very unusual to get the president for like 6.5 hours. So we're suggesting that the president come and see the first act and then he goes. And I knew what was happening. Now, first of all, Clinton knows this play. He knows what this play is about. And I, as gently as I could, said, well, if the president is thinking of leaving at intermission, then I'm afraid we're going to have to cancel the event. There's just no way that. So anyway, then, oh, no, it's fine. Now I know what was happening. What was happening was that someone had read the play and they were quite concerned. And I'll tell you why. Because the play is about this character that I portrayed named Hickey. And in the course of the play, as things get more and more revealed, you realize that this man that I'm playing has been a philanderer. He's cheated on his wife quite a lot. And by the end of the play, he is arrested and taken off because he ended up ending his wife's life because she forgave him too much and he couldn't live with it. Mm-hmm. So now imagine this. There's 2,000 people at the Brooks Atkinson Theater watching President Clinton watching this play. And at the end of the night, we take our curtain call. They bring out the presidential podium. Bill Clinton stands up there and he says, well, I suppose we should all thank Kevin and this extraordinary company of actors for giving us all way too much to think about. And the audience fell over in laughter. And then he gave a great speech. And I thought that was a pretty good way to handle that.
Well, in that way, him and Frank Underwood share like a charisma. There's certain presidents that just have, politicians that just have this charisma. You can't stop listening to them. Some of it is the accent, but some of it is some other magical thing.
When I was starting to do research, I wanted to meet with the whip, Kevin McCarthy. And he wouldn't meet with me till I called his office back and said, tell him I'm playing a Democrat, not a Republican. And then he met with me.
Nice.
And he was helpful. He took me to whip meetings.
Politicians,